Well, hello again. My name's Adrian Gilbert, and we're going through bit by bit the last book in the Bible called the Book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse, the one which is to do with the end of the age, which I think is what we're going through now, to be honest, especially when we're suffering from strange things like this coronavirus. Where's that come from? Very apocalyptic in my view. But anyway, we are up to the latter part of chapter 7, and we're going to be discussing the 144,000 from the tribes of Israel. You may have read about this and you're wondering why that's been put here and what that's all about. And we're going to go into that, and then we're going to finish off with the end of the chapter. But before we go on to all of that, I just want to ask you, if you haven't done so already, would you mind subscribing to this channel and ringing the bell and hopefully liking this video? And I say that for a specific reason, that I'm trying to build the audience so that YouTube will take more notice of this channel, at least with this subject area, and do more for us in the way of recommendations. We're up to, I think it's around 446 so far, people subscribed. Next target is of course 500, but I would like to get it up to 1,000. So the sooner we can do that, the better. The more people that see these videos, the more that we'll be able to get on and do more. I know it's a sort of roundabout thing, but it really does help if you can subscribe. Okay, well, let's get on with this. So, the 144,000 from the tribes of Israel. And I want to go into this, if I can get it to work. Yeah. Now I'm going to read out a little bit from the chapter which talks about these things. And after these things, I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, each holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the winds should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel. And after this he goes through the tribes one by one, telling us their names, and 12,000 of this tribe, 12,000 of that. So 12 times 12 is 144, so 12 times 12,000 is 144,000. Simple arithmetic there. Now, this is all reminiscent of a prophecy made by Jesus himself on the Mount of Olives. And that bit, it says, And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other. You notice I've underlined his elect and 4 winds. The 4 winds are underlined in the previous piece, and the 4 elect are the equivalent of the servants of our God in that previous piece that we were looking at. So the 4 angels of the corners holding back the 4 winds again reminds us of the 4 sons of Horus, who marked the cardinal directions in Egyptian times. And you remember I talked about that in the earlier lecture on the 4 horsemen. And I showed you their symbols sitting around the 4 corners of the horizon, north, south, east and west. And that was kind of very important when we were discussing all of that chapter about the 4 horsemen and how they were tied again with 4 colours and 4 different directions. But that's in the previous lecture, so I'm not going to repeat myself on that. So, what is the meaning of the 12 tribes of Israel, and why are the 144,000 called the servants of God? To understand this, we must go to the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, where the story of Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel, and his sons is told in great detail. So you can see here a family tree. I've called it a family tree of Israel. It begins with Abraham. And Abraham was married to a wife called Sarah, or Sarai, I think, originally, and her name was changed to Sarah. He also had a child with a concubine, Hagar, who was his wife's servant, who gave birth to Ishmael, and from Ishmael was descended the Ishmaelites, from whom the Arab nations claimed their descent. So they're also descended from Abraham. And the reason he went to Hagar was it seemed like Sarah wasn't going to have any children. She was already an old woman, and despairing that she wasn't going to have children. Then God tells her that, yes, you are, I'm going to give you a son. And she laughs, and he changes her name to Sarah, which meant laughter, I think. Anyway, she gives birth to Isaac, and Abraham's actually a bit mean to Hagar and Ishmael. They get banished from the household. Sarah's jealous of them, I think. And so they go off, and they form a separate nation of the Arabs. Descending from Isaac and Sarah, Isaac had two sons. It shouldn't be Sarah, it should be Rebecca. I've got the wrong thing there. It should be Rebecca. Never mind. Isaac married Rebecca, and he had two sons, Esau and Jacob. And Esau's kind of like the strong guy, hairy man, the physical one, his father's favourite in many respects. And he kind of looks after the sheep. Maybe I've got that the wrong way around. But anyway, Jacob is kind of the clever one, but not as physical. I can put it that way. And Sarah wants Jacob. He's the mother's favourite, and she wants Jacob to prosper and progress. So she tricks her husband into giving him the blessing that should have gone to Esau as the older son. It's all great stuff in the Bible. Anyway, but Jacob also, I won't say tricks, but he makes some soup, and his brother comes back home hungry, and says, "That smells nice, that soup." And Jacob says, "Well, yeah, you can have a bowl, but you've got to sell me your birthright." So Esau thinks, "Oh, that doesn't matter. I'll have a bowl of soup." "Yeah, okay, come on." So he has a bowl of soup. So he gets the birthright as well, and they have a big falling out anyway. And descended from Jacob, Israel are the 12 sons, and we're going to go into all of that now in the next slides. Now, to understand the significance of this family tree, we need to go back to the story of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, meaning he who rules with God. Jacob is one of Abraham's grandsons, the second son of Isaac, and he's a bit of a character. His mother tricks his father Isaac into giving him the primary family blessing as given to Isaac by his father Abraham. Later, his older brother Esau, also called Edom, sells his birthright as older son in exchange for a bowl of soup. Given that he was the stronger of the two, Esau obviously didn't think this transaction meant anything. I mean, we can imagine he was a bully and would keep the birthright anyway. Soon after, Jacob leaves home. He's actually fallen out with Esau, and he's got to get away. But he also wants to find a wife. He leaves home, and he goes to Haran, from where his mother comes, and where Abraham used to live for a while. Indeed, Abraham's father is buried there, and Jacob's uncle Laban, his mother's brother, lives there. I've actually been to Haran, and I've seen the place where Abraham's father, Terah, is supposedly buried, and I've seen the well where the wife of Isaac, Rebecca, was gathering water, and she was brought back, and she ended up marrying Isaac. So a very interesting place if you ever have the chance, but probably a bit dangerous at the moment because it's right on the border with Syria and Turkey, and it's a very hot spot at present. Anyway, Jacob falls in love with Laban's younger daughter, Rachel, but to win her hand, he must first work for his uncle for 7 years. When the time comes, Laban palms him off with Rachel's older sister, Leah, and he has to work a further 7 years to get Rachel's hand. And Jacob fathers lots of sons, 6 by Leah, 2 by Rachel, and 2 each by his wife's 2 maidservants. And just a word there. It seems, from what I can tell, with Abraham and the birth of Ishmael, this idea of the father of the house being allowed to father other children with the maidservant seems to have been an acceptable practice. So I don't think we should judge it too much in our times when things are obviously different. But we could think of these other 2 women as being like sort of minor wives of Israel. Not quite like Leah and Rachel, but you know, they call them concubines, which I think is a word I don't really understand, to be honest. But anyway, so he has 12 sons in all. And here we can see the 12 sons of Jacob, Israel. You've got Reuben, the oldest, then Simeon, Levi, Judah, Zebulun, and Issachar. They're all sons of Leah. Well, it's understandable that Leah has lots of sons because they're married for 7 years before he's allowed to marry Rachel. So she's got a head start there. But then he has these other sons by the 2 concubines, Dan, Gad, Asher, and Naphtali. And finally, he has Joseph of the many-coloured coat, and his younger brother Benjamin. And unfortunately, poor old Rachel dies in giving birth to Benjamin, and she's actually buried near Bethlehem. So she only has 2 sons, but they're actually Jacob's favourites. So there we have the 12 sons of Jacob, Israel, and we can continue the story. The older brothers were jealous of Joseph and his father's favourite, and sold him as a slave, and pretended that he was dead. You know, the wolves had got him. But anyway, Joseph was then sold on to the Egyptians, and he became first minister after a lot of other adventures. You can read all about that in the book of Genesis if you're so moved. And he became first minister of the Egyptian Pharaoh because he interpreted his dreams, and he was a very wise man. And he was able to save his father and brothers from famine. And the story of the 7 fat cows and the 7 thin cows, he tells the Egyptians to store grain in the good years, and then in the famine years they've got the grain there which they can sell or give away to the people to keep them alive. Good thinking, Joseph. And his father comes down with the rest of the family from Canaan, because they're starving too, you know, it's famine time, to see if they can get help from Egypt. And Joseph, of course, recognises them as a bit of adventure. Anyway, eventually he reveals who he is, and his father's delighted, and you know, he looks after the family. So Jacob, Israel, rewarded Joseph by passing on his greatest blessings to him. I mean, that would be first of all, the blessing that's come down from Abraham to Isaac and then to Jacob, Israel. And then he passes on other blessings, and he blesses Joseph's 2 sons. Joseph has 2 sons. He's married to an Egyptian woman who's the daughter of the high priest. And Jacob blesses the 2 sons, but again he crosses his hands, so the major blessing goes to the younger son. And these 2 sons are called Manasseh, the elder one, and Ephraim, who's the younger son, and the younger son gets the bigger blessing, which is that he's going to become a nation and a company of nations. And Jacob adopts them into his own family, gives them the same status as his own sons. So in other words, his grandsons have the same status as their uncles, which means a lot in terms of land holdings. Because normally when the land is handed out to the father and then he passes on a bit of it to this son, a bit to that son, then it goes further down and gets split up more and more. But because they're adopted into Israel, Jacob's own family, they're entitled to the same kind of share as his own sons would be. That's how much he respects and rewards Joseph. And the tribe of Manasseh replaced the tribe of Levi as landholders. The Levites became priestly guards in the Exodus and thereafter priests. Now it's important this because the Levites were kind of like the 13th tribe, you could call them. Actually, I suppose you would say that the tribe of Manasseh or Ephraim was the 13th. But they've been adopted into the family, and the Levites have had to find another role. And actually Moses and Aaron were both Levites. And the Levites were kind of like the strong men. They're the ones who carry the ark, and only they're allowed to go near it and touch it. Anyone else who touches it gets struck dead. So they're kind of special as well, but in a different way. So as they appear, the 12 tribes appear in the book of Numbers in chapter 1. We have Reuben, Simeon and Gad, and then we have Judah, Issachar and Zebulon, Ephraim, Manasseh and Benjamin, and Dan, Asher and Naphtali. Now these are roughly dividing between the sons of the different wives. I say roughly because it's not quite exactly like that. I think Gad is one of the sons of one of the concubines. But certainly Reuben and Simeon were the two eldest sons. Judah, Issachar and Zebulon were also sons of Leah. And of course Joseph and Benjamin were both sons of Rachel. So Ephraim and Manasseh descended from Rachel, and so is Benjamin, and they form a little trinity. Then you have Dan, Asher and Naphtali forming the fourth group. And the symbolism of the 12 tribes is also partly astrological. I hope I'm not confusing you too much here. I know this is kind of a lot to take in, and you might need to watch this lecture more than once to get the full details, because there is quite a lot we're going to go into. But then isn't that the fun of these? If I just said to you, oh yeah, well it just means that in a couple of sentences, it'd be no fun at all, would it? Okay, so each tribe is to be assigned a different sign, right? So Reuben, Aquarius, Simeon, Pisces, Gad, Aries, Ephraim, Taurus, Manasseh, Gemini, Benjamin, Cancer, Judah, Leo, Issachar, Virgo, Zebulon, Libra, Dan, Scorpio, Asher, Sagittarius, and Naphtali, Capricorn. And of these 12, obviously there are 4 which are kind of like the leader tribes of their groups. And these are according to what we would call the fixed signs of Aquarius, which is Reuben, Taurus, which is Ephraim, Leo, which is Judah, and Dan, which is Scorpio. So they're kind of like the leaders of their groups. And so we see them, the groups, arranged. This is the camp of the Israelites as arranged during the Exodus period. And this diagram was done by a Jesuit, Juan Bautista Villalpando, in his opus Commentary on Ezekiel, which was published in 1596. And this is kind of a standard representation that you'll find repeated in many different places. And you can see them in the same groups that I had them earlier. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they're facing the different directions. Ephraim has got Ochidens, and got Judah as Oriens, the other two are north and south. I don't actually agree with the placement with the Ochidens and the Oriens, etc., but that's how he's got it anyway. This is based on a description of the camp as ordered by God and organised by Moses and Aaron, Numbers 2, 1 to 34. Moses and Aaron, and now interestingly, Aaron is actually, or Aaron, is the Hebrew for Orion, or one of the names for Orion. They were Levites, as I said, and their tribe was in the centre, guarding the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant. The other tribes were arranged in their groups around the outside, you can see. The total number of Israelites at that time, as in the Exodus, excluding the Levites, is given in Numbers as 603,550, which is considerably more than the 144,000 of Revelation, chapter 7. So why? Why is that? Why is there this discrepancy? Obviously, there's a lot more sons of Israel or Jacob than there are of the 144,000. But we'll come to that as to exactly what's going on here. Now, the camp of the Israelites develops into the New Jerusalem, which we will discuss later on in these lectures. The vision of Jerusalem is of a square, walled and towered city. Its sides face towards the cardinal directions. And there you can see it. There's the angel showing St. John the vision of the New Jerusalem. And you can see it's arranged very similarly to the camp of the Israelites, but with some differences. But you can see that there are 3 gates on each side, making 12 in all. There's a gate for each tribe, basically. And the way that the city inside is arranged is, again, according to tribe. And there's a little hillock with the lamb on top. We'll come to that in a later lecture in more detail. Within each wall there are 3 gates, making 12 in all. These gates are for the 12 tribes of Israel. Each has his own gate. Now, to understand the significance of the 144,000 servants of God who are to be sealed on their foreheads, we must consider another event in the life of Jacob. Yeah, Jacob had quite a career, and he's actually, in many respects, he's the main man. You want to understand that the Bible is really the story of a family. Yes, it begins with Genesis, with the creation of Adam. We have the story of the Tower of Babel. We have the story of the flood with Noah's Ark and all of that. But really the story proper begins with this Abraham, or Abram as he's first called, and his name's changed to Abraham. And Abraham's family, descending down through Isaac to Jacob to his sons, which become the tribes of Israel who conquer Canaan and found the kingdom of Israel under David and Solomon, and then that kingdom is split up and into 2 parts. You have the king still called Israel, the northern kingdom of 10 tribes carries the name Israel. They're carried off by the Assyrians. But the tribe of Judah and in the southern kingdom hangs on. And that's only 2 tribes. It's Judah and Benjamin together form the tribe of Judah, along with most of the Levitical priests. And then part of them is carried off by the Assyrians as well. They disappear from history along with the 10 tribes. Then the remnants that are in Jerusalem are eventually carried off to Babylon. You have the wailing at the waters of Babylon. You have all the story in the book of Daniel, what happens for 70 years that they're captives in Babylon. Eventually, the Persians conquer Babylon, and Cyrus, the king of the Persians, allows them to go home back to Jerusalem, where they can rebuild the city, rebuild the temple. And then you go on into the later history of the Jews. The people of Judah, or the Judeans, become known as the Hudae, or the Jews. And the Jews then, their history carries on into through the period of the Hellenistic wars between Egypt and Syria. You have people like Antiochus IV, who destroys the temple and sacrifices a pig. Goes on into the Roman period, when we have Jesus, and 70 AD, when the city is again destroyed completely. The Jews are banished out of Israel and become wanderers among the nations, till we end up in the modern day with the refounding of Israel in 1948. In my opinion, it shouldn't be called Israel, it should be called Judah, because not all the Israelites have come back yet to the state of Israel. That's still a work in progress. The Jews are really only descended from the old kingdom of Judah, which was the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, 2 tribes. The other 10 disappeared from history, but more on that another time. Anyway, so Jacob himself is a kind of central character in all of this, and he has various dreams and visions of his own. And on his way to Haran, while running from his brother Esau, now he's on his way to go to Haran to find a wife, but he's also running away from his brother, who he thinks wants to kill him. He stops off at a place called Luz, which he later changes the name to Bethel. I think it's now called Beit Shean, and it's just a little bit to the north of Jerusalem in what we would now call the West Bank. And here Jacob has a dream, and he has a prophetic dream. In it he sees a stairway to heaven with angels going up and down it. At the top of the ladder is God, who makes a covenant with Jacob. He promises him the land where he is, which is Canaan, what we've now called Israel, and that his descendants will multiply like the dust of the earth, to spread north, south, east and west. They will be a blessing to the whole world. So there we can see God at the top of the ladder there with the angels going up. I can't see any going down there, but they go up and down. And when he wakes up, he takes the stone that he's been using as a pillow, you can see him there lying his head on a stone, and makes an altar of it, pouring oil on the stone. And the reason he does this, of course, is because that stone has witnessed his dream. It's been right next to his head. So he's had this dream of this ladder and meeting God at the top of the ladder, and God has now made a promise to him. You sort of follow the right path, do the right things, and be a good boy. And I'm going to multiply your seed, that's your sons, your children, to fill the earth with loads and loads of them, north, south, east, and west, like the dust of what does he call it? Like the dust of the earth. Yeah, the dust of the earth. There's an awful lot of that, isn't there? So there's going to be lots and lots of Israelites in the earth, and this is the promise he's made to him. So Jacob quite naturally takes the stone and he pours oil on it to recognise that this was a blessing and to thank God for what's been told to him. He's still a young man at this time, by the way. So he's now had this extraordinary esoteric mystical experience, you could say. And it is a prophetic dream, as we will discover. And Jacob changed the name of the place where he had had his dream to Bethel, meaning house of God, Bethel. As an old man, he visits it again, this time with all his family. He builds an altar and pours oil over a raised stone, which is possibly the same one that was his pillow. In fact, I would think it's very likely to have been the actual pillow stone that he would have raised. So we call it the pillow stone. And God changed his name from Jacob to Israel. And you see all this in Genesis 35, 1-15. Although it's not recorded in the Bible, it seems likely that Jacob took the stone with him when the family fled famine in Canaan and went to Egypt. I was saying about that earlier, about how Joseph became the vizier of Egypt and advised the Pharaoh to store up grain in the fat years so they'd have food for the lean years. And Israel and his family came to Egypt. Eventually they discovered that the vizier was his own son, and of course he was very good to his family and looked after them. As a token of God's blessing on Israel, it would have been of huge symbolic importance, that's the stone. It witnessed the covenant between God and the Israelites that they should inherit the land of Canaan. So what happened to this very important stone? Yeah, we kind of lose sight of it, don't we? But we're going to see something which does seem to be the stone, or certainly has that reputation, so later on. So what is reputed to be Jacob's pillar stone still exists. Also known as Leah-Phael, the stone of destiny, the Pharaoh's stone, and Jacob's pillow or pillar stone, it's in Britain. Yeah, it's in Britain, and there you can see it in all its glory. Legend has it that the stone was taken to Ireland along with a Jewish royal princess by Jeremiah the prophet. This was after the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians in 586 BC. The princess Ti, or Tamatefi, married the king of Ireland, and their capital was the hill of Tara. It was transferred from Ireland to Scotland by the Dalriada Scots, who came from Northern Ireland to Britain. In 574, Aidan, King of Scots, is said to have been crowned upon it at Iona by St. Columba. Iona is a lovely island, one of the Inner Hebrides, well worth a visit if you have a chance, because that's where St. Columba came to begin his mission to convert the Picts to Christianity. Scots were already Christian by that time, but he founded his monastery in Iona, and that developed as a major monastery, and it's a beautiful place. I do recommend it if you're ever up that way, near Mull, in the Inner Hebrides. In 843, Kenneth MacAlpine became king of both the Picts and the Scots. This was through marriage, or I think it was either his marriage or his mother's marriage, but anyway, he inherited both kingdoms. And for his coronation, he had the stone moved to Scone. Yes, I got the right pronunciation there, which is near Perth. It's about 3 miles from Perth. Again, I've been there, beautiful place. Well recommend a visit to Perth if you're ever in Scotland, and go to Scone. What was Scone Abbey is now Scone Castle. I'm not sure who lives there, if it's National Trust or whatever, but you can have a nice tea there, and they serve tea with scones. We call them scones in England, but anyway, we eat them with cream and jam, and you can get a nice scone with jam and cream and a cup of tea up there at the palace. Very nice, well worth seeing. Thereafter, kings of Scotland were regularly crowned on it, that's the stone, till in 1296 the stone was removed by Edward I of England to Westminster Abbey in London. It stayed there for 700 years, till it was returned to Scotland in 1996. Today it's in Edinburgh Castle. So I can remember when this stone was in the coronation seat in Westminster Abbey, and it wasn't particularly protected. You could go up, you could go and touch it, you could go and see it, and there it was. And you wonder, what the heck? You know, why is this great big lump of stone stuck under this old chair in Westminster Abbey? Well, the chair was actually commissioned for Edward I, especially to put this stone in. And it's the coronation seat, and nearly all the kings and queens of England, and later on, after the uniting of the thrones of Scotland and England in 1603, the kings of Great Britain all been crowned on there. And the last one, of course, was our own queen in 1953, and she's still alive. But is there any evidence, other than legend, that any of this is true? Well, yes. Firstly, there are the ancient annals of Ireland and Scotland. These tell us about various migrations to Ireland by different waves of migrants. One of these is the Tuatha De Danann, a name that can be translated as Tribe of Dan. And of course, Dan was one of the 12 tribes, and they were mariners. Their territory was partly in the north of Israel. There's a place called Tel Dan up there that you can go and see, up at the source of the Jordan. But mainly in the vicinity of what is now Tel Aviv, and I should add Jaffa, and on the coast. And these Danites were traders, so it's not inconceivable that they knew of the British Isles as a source of metals, gold, silver, copper, lead, and most especially tin. And you needed tin if you were going to make bronze, and Britain was the place for getting bronze in the Bronze Age in the Mediterranean. That's why we have all these legends about Joseph of Arimathea coming to Britain as a tin trader. But Britain also had other minerals or metals too. You know, there was copper here, there was gold, some gold, probably pretty much used up by this time. But there's a lot of gold bracelets and ornaments and things being found buried in Britain that go back to the Stone Age. There was silver, there was lead, there was iron. The Romans used to dig up the iron here. And of course, later on, we've had the whole Iron Age of our own in the Victorian period with the coal mining and the iron ore mining and smelting to make steel. That's a whole different story, isn't it? So it's not inconceivable that some of them, that's the tribe of Dan, fled to Britain at the time of the Assyrian invasions of Israel in 721 BC. I mean, put yourself in their shoes. You've got the Assyrians, now they're the most fierce fighting people of their time, and they're coming to your country, and you know that they want to destroy your cities and take you into slavery, and they're going to deport you. What are you going to do if you've got boats? I think what you're going to do is you're going to get in those boats and you're going to get the hell out of there. And if you've got friends, people that know you in the British Isles, perhaps you've been doing some trade with them before, that would be a very sensible place to go, wouldn't it? But you may have other friends in other places too. So it's not inconceivable that some of them fled to Britain at the time of the Assyrian invasions of Israel in 721 BC. Other Danites could have joined them, bringing Jeremiah and the Jewish princesses after the Babylonian invasion of 586 BC. Now, we read all about Jeremiah and the princesses. The story goes that the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians, when Nebuchadnezzar came along and besieged the city, and the king at that time was called Zedekiah. Hezekiah was an earlier king. I'm not sure if he was I don't think he was his grandfather. He was an earlier one. And the king of Babylon, he'd broken his promise to the king of Babylon to be his ally and tried to make an alliance with Egypt instead. So the Babylonians are furious, and they took him out. They took his sons out and beheaded them in front of him. And then they blinded him, Zedekiah, and took him back in chains to Babylon, where he died. So that seemed to be the end of the house of David, the throne of David. And yet God had made a promise that never would the throne of David lack a man to sit on it. We have to wonder what this throne was. Was it the stone? Was that the throne? Was that actually what David would sit on as his throne? That with you. But anyway, the princesses, we're told very specifically in the Bible that Jeremiah the prophet took them to Egypt. And so there's a story about the twig, a tender twig, again in the Bible. I don't know exactly where to be able to point you to it. It's planted into the top of the hill of Israel. And this tender twig is seen as being a princess. And they're taken to Ireland. And she marries Heremon, the king of Ireland. There's a whole other things on this. So it's not inconceivable that some of them fled to Britain at the time of the Assyrian invasions of Israel in 721. Other Danites could have joined them, bringing Jeremiah and the Jewish prince, I've said all this, haven't I, to the Babylonian invasion. The Scots, or Scythians, now the Scots claimed to be Scythians, or Scythians, came to Ireland with the Milesians. Now, just a couple of words about Milesians. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the Milesians, who they were. If you read a lot of so-called history books, they'll tell you, yeah, well, they came from Spain. Miles comes from soldier. These were soldiers who came from Spain. It's not true. That's not the story. They're descendants of someone called Miled, who came from a city called Miletus, which is in southwestern Turkey. Miletus was a very important city, particularly in the sort of 7th century period. And it had colonies all over the place, including in Egypt. And Milesians many of them were soldiers, and they fought as mercenaries for the Egyptians. So they led a rebellion against the Persians, and the Persians eventually destroyed Miletus and carried the people away, and that was kind of the end of it. But there were Milesians in Egypt, and it's the Milesian invasion of Ireland seems to be by these people who crossed. Their story is they moved across northern Africa, crossed over at the Pillars of Hercules into Spain, went up to the northwest point of Spain, Braganza as it was called at that time, and later from there they crossed over to Ireland. They could be ones who brought the stone with them. It was either the Tuatha De Danann earlier, or it was them. Probably them, I think. And that seems to be when the princesses were brought along as well. So that transfers the throne of David and the descendants of David through the female line to Ireland, which is very interesting. And the Scots, the Scythians, came to Ireland with the Milesians. They were driven out of Egypt in 569 BC. First went to Spain via North Africa. They probably arrived in Ireland not earlier than 550 BC. They conquered the Tuatha De Danann and promptly took charge of the stone. Well, they may have had it already, I'm not sure. It's a grey area, that. Nearly 1,000 years later, they moved to Scotland. Right, so we always think of the Scots as living in Scotland. Well, Scotland originally was in Northern Ireland, which is very interesting because the Northern Irish and the Scots are very close even now. And it's one reason why there is this separation between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland even today. Now there's something else I want to draw your attention to, which is kind of scientific evidence. I've discussed legends and migration legends, and I've written a whole book on the Stone of Destiny, which you can get hold of, and it's got a lot of detail in it if you're interested in that subject. But I'm going to give you an outline now of other evidence, you could call it physical evidence, that this stone is certainly symbolic of Jacob's pillow, could actually be the very stone. And it's not just a pillow, it's a stone that contains a message and knowledge connected with this prophecy. So here's some scientific evidence about the stone. First of all, it's oblong in shape. The dimensions given in the official guide to Westminster Abbey of 1973 are that the length is 26 3/4 inches, the width is 16 3/4 inches, and the depth is 10 3/4 inches. Now I have to add here that the stone is quite sort of rough and chipped and damaged, so some of these measures might be a bit off, but they give us a pretty good guide, I think, to what the original was, or was certainly meant to be. And the stone's obviously very worn with age, but it seems a unit of measure close to 21 inches divided by 2, i.e. 10.5 inches, was used as the unit of measure. Now 21 inches is an Egyptian royal cubit, so half of a royal cubit would be 10.5 inches, and that's very, very close to the 10 3/4 inches that they're saying the depth of the stone is. And if you take the other measures, there's the long width and the inner width, because it's long one way and not so long the other. Take the measures, the depth, let's say it's 10.5 inches, then there's a long width, which is the 26 3/4 inches, and then you've got the other width, which is the 16 3/4 inches. And if you work that out, that's very, very close to 2.5 times the depth and 1.5 times the depth. So you've got a stone that's 1 by 1.5 by 2.5 in its dimensions, the unit of measure being half an Egyptian cubit. I think that's very significant, but there's more to it than that. So what does this all mean? Well, firstly, the top of it, which would be the seat, has the proportions 2.5 by 1.5. Let me just go back here. You can see that you've got the top of this stone, and the measure I've called C is 2.5 times a half an Egyptian royal cubit, and the measure I've called B is 1.5 times a half an Egyptian cubit. So we've got 2.5 by 1.5. So that's a direct link with the Ark of the Covenant, which had a seat measuring 2.5 by 1.5 whole cubits. So I hope this isn't being too complicated here, but if you imagine that the stone, the area of the top of the stone is kind of a quarter of the area of the top of the Ark of the Covenant. And the volume of the whole stone is actually 1/8 of the volume of the Ark of the Covenant, because it's measured in half cubits instead of whole cubits. But there is a proportional relationship, the same shape. It's not quite the same shape with the depth, because the stone's only 1 unit deep, whereas the Ark of the Covenant is 1.5 deep. But that's, by the by, it's the seat on top which is important here. Could Moses have taken this stone with him when the Israelites left Egypt in the Exodus? Might he have constructed his ark seat with the same proportions, but in whole rather than half cubits? Well, I've said that I think that if Jacob, Israel, he had this special affection for this stone because it had been a witness to that amazing promise he'd had in his dream where he met God. I mean, he's not going to leave that behind when he goes off to Egypt. He probably, first thing he would take more than anything else. And that would have been a family treasure. So when Moses leads them out of Egypt in the Exodus, what's he going to do with it? He's going to leave it there? No, they're going to take it with them, aren't they? So that's, I think, he had that with him when they and they went to Mount Sinai and he's doing his 10 Commandments thing. And then he decides he's told to build an ark, and the portions of the ark are very similar in shape, anyway, the top, to the Stone of Destiny. This alone suggests a connection, but there is more. We see here the stone and its measures. So you can see it. We see the stone and its measures, and you can imagine there are also 3 perimeter measurements to consider. These could be ascertained by tying strings around the stone. And there are 3 ways to do this. Now, if you've got your stone, we've got something I can. Now imagine this box is the stone, right? You can put a string round that way. You can put a string round that way. You can put a string round that way. So you've got 3 perimeters that you can put around this oblong, and they will give you different lengths of the perimeters. So the shortest one is going to be 5, because that's going to be 1 plus 1 plus 1.5 plus 1.5, and that makes 5. And then you're going to have a perimeter of 7, and you're going to have another perimeter of 8. And those 3, if you join those strings together, you can form a triangle. Tie them together, or at the corners, one down there, one there, one there. Gives you a triangle, and it's a kind of odd-shaped triangle. At first sight, you might think, well, this triangle's really got no purpose. This is just barking up the wrong tree. Doesn't have any meaning. But when you go into it with a bit of geometry, as I have done, you discover some amazing things. So there's the triangle derived from the 3 loops of string. It's a 5, 7, 8 triangle. And you can soon discover that the angle between the sides, the 5 side at the bottom and the 8 side, which is the longest one, there's an angle of 60 degrees there. How do I know this? Well, I cheated. I used a bit of trigonometry. I used the cosine formula, actually. I did A-level mathematics. But I'm sure that you wouldn't need to do that. You could measure it with a protractor if you'd done this carefully enough. And you would find out that that was 60 degrees. And you can drop a perpendicular from the top to the bottom. That's drawing a vertical straight down. So you have a right angle, that's 90 degrees there, where that vertical hits the bottom. And then if you've got a 60-degree angle there at the bottom, the top angle must be 30 degrees. So I've just written that here. This makes a right angle triangle. The sum of all the angles in the triangle has to be 180 degrees. I hope you remember that from doing a bit of, I'm sure you've all done something about geometry when you were at school. 180 degrees, the angles inside a triangle. So if you've got the right angle's 90, and then you've got a 60, so that only leaves 30 for the top angle. And if you have a 30, 60, 90 triangle, then the short side at the bottom there, facing the 30-degree angle, is going to be 4 units compared to the 8 units of the hypotenuse. That's just how it works. Right, so it's going to be half the length of the hypotenuse anyway. Cosine of 60 degrees would be 0.5, but that's beside the point. So this gives us the basis of the ad triangulum system of architecture, and I'm not going to go into that, but it's all over the place, and you can study that and have a lot of fun with it. Now we can do this again to create another 30, 60, 90 triangle at the base of the large triangle. Right. Right, so you've got a base here of 5 units. You take this line and you chop that one that was 8, and it splits it 2.5 to 5.5. So facing that 30-degree angle, you've got 2.5, and well, we know it's 2.5 because we know it has to be half of that 5 at the bottom. I hope I'm not confusing you here, but it is very simple, really, if you know a little bit of geometry and trigonometry. So that's going to be 2.5, half of the 5. And again, we've got a 30-degree angle there. And that's basis of the ad quadratum system. So now we're going to do something rather more complicated, and I'm going to take you through this step by step. So try to be patient. It's not as difficult as it might look at first. Believe me, it's not. It's actually simple geometry, and I'm sure that this is the kind of thing that people like the Egyptians were doing, and Moses and whoever could have worked this out from them. And it seems like Jacob's stone has this built in as well. So there's our triangle, and I've labelled it ABC in the diagram. If you look carefully, you'll see ABC. That's the big triangle derived from the strings or that we tied around our stone. Now, we've split the side from B to E, which gives us the line A to E is the 2.5 that we mentioned previously. And that left 5.5, which would be the length from E to C. And C is at the center of this diagram. You with me? I hope so. Now, you can double the length of that 5. So you're going up and you're creating a longer line of which will be 11. And from that you can derive this whole big square with side 11. It's very simple. It's twice the 5.5. So you've got a square of 11. But we've also got the side which was 7 units in length. We drop that down, and we use that as a radius to draw the circle. And we can we know the perimeter of a circle is given by the formula 2 times pi times r, where r is the radius, pi is this strange number, 22 divided by 7. That's an approximation, of course. So 2 times pi times r is 2 times 22 over 7 times 7. Well, the 7's cancel each other out, so it's 2 times 22, which is 44, which was the same as the perimeter of the square. So I know that's a little bit long-winded, but what we're seeing here is that dimensions of this stone, if you know how to use it, actually provide you with a system, geometric system, for producing a square of a circle. And that might not mean a lot to you. It's just that that is a primary symbol in architecture. It's the basis of what's called the ad quadratum system, and it's also the system that's used in the pyramids, in particular the Great Pyramid. So this is very, very significant because the circle symbolizes spirit and the square symbolizes matter. So it's the reconciliation between spirit and matter is what is being symbolized here with squaring the circle. This is very esoteric stuff. And it goes on further from here. If you take the radius of the circle and use it as the height, take the radius of the circle and you can use that as the height of the pyramid. So you've got your radius that you've drawn your flat circle, you turn that up like that, and that gives you your height of your pyramid to create what's called a pi pyramid with the right base. So there we have it. There is a right pyramid, a pi pyramid, and that is of the type that is the Great Pyramid. Sorry, you can't see it there. There's the generation of the pyramid. You can see there the height is 7, the circle has a radius of 7, and the sides are 11. And this actually applies in the Great Pyramid, which has a height of, I think it's 280 cubits. Each side is 440. That's right. Divide that by each of those by 40, you get this 7 to 11 relationship for the side to the height. So we have this actually in the Great Pyramid itself, which is still the only great building from the ancient times, is the greatest, the only one of the 7 wonders of the world that still survives. So the word for ladder in Greek is scala, and in Latin is also scala, not spelt with Greek letters though. From this we derive our English word scale, as in the progression of musical notes going up and down in scales. However, scala does not just mean a ladder, but also a staircase. In other words, anything with steps leads from one level to another level. I mean, we have that even in the English word escalator, or scaling a wall. You know, it's the scala is something with steps. I therefore don't believe that Jacob's prophetic dream was of a ladder per se, but rather of a staircase. So could Jacob's dream look something like this? The Great Pyramid of Giza, and its proportions are given by the geometry we've discussed. It stands 4 square, facing north, south, east and west. Jacob's pillow holds the code to building such a pyramid. And going back, the camp of the Israelites and later New Jerusalem are also 4 square, and they're kind of linked with this pyramid design, and they're kind of like the base of the pyramid in a way. So Jacob's dream seems to be a prophecy that through his family will grow like a pyramid, small at the top and large at the bottom. In other words, it's like your family tree. It fans out as it goes down the generations. And the angels coming down the ladder are the servants of God, his elect, coming into the earth to aid in the plan of redemption. The promise is that they will later return to heaven at the end of the age. In other words, Jacob is going to have a big family. That's what's been prophesied, but that family is going to enable these servants of God, these angels, to come down into the world, come down the ladder, down the staircase, to enter into the world, to work on it, to help to redeem it. They form the leaven that's going to raise the bread. This is what Jesus was on about when he was talking about you are the salt of the earth, and if the salt loses its flavour, it's not useful for anything but to be scattered and trampled underfoot. In other words, these are the people that have been sent, or not people, souls, high initiates even, that have come down voluntarily to help in this plan of God's to redeem the earth. And this is very like in Buddhism. They have this whole term, the bodhisattva ideal. But it's one thing, you know, in Buddhism you want to sort of clear your mind and lose your desires and become Buddha-like and reach cosmic consciousness and become an enlightened one. But an even higher ideal than that is, rather than going off to heaven, thank you very much, I'm now enlightened, come back and help to work for the redemption of other people and the redemption of the world. And this is what these people coming into the earth to do this work are the bodhisattvas in Buddhist terms. I prefer to use the term starseeds. So what's the connection between all this and the 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe who are mentioned in chapter 7? Why are they sealed and called servants of God? I believe the answer is quite simple. The angels are starseeds. The meaning of Jacob's dream is that through him and his extended family, The possibility would be created for developed souls, the angels, to come down the ladder to incarnate on planet Earth. These souls would act as leaven, reincarnating over and over again as the plan of salvation unfolded. John was one of these, as were the other prophets and many other people who have influenced the world for good. The promise made to these souls is that one day they would be able to return back up the ladder. Their fate is sealed. They're the 144,000, a tiny number in the 7 billion that are on the planet today, but essential for God's plan of salvation to work out. So you've got to understand that when Jesus came here, he didn't come alone. The way was prepared. You know, we've got John the Baptist, we're told he's preparing the way of the Lord, but he's not the only one. And when Jesus went to Capernaum and he selected his disciples, the first one, Peter and Andrew and James and John, these were people. These were among the souls, the 144,000 who had already come here to do this work. But remember, most of the Israelites have been shifted out of Israel and disappeared. And now those souls are probably incarnating in every tribe and nation all over the planet. And you will find that there are people who are these bodhisattvas. You might recognize some of them by the works that they do, but a lot will be inconspicuous. You won't see them. There's also bad guys, by the way, incarnated, but we're talking about the good guys here. So they would be the leaven, reincarnating over and over again, working to help this plan along, step by step. People like the prophets, for instance, would have been among them. Some of the kings, all sorts of people, not just kings and prophets, but ordinary people. But that's not the end of the chapter. Let's shift that back. It's not the end of the chapter. Attention now switches to the souls who have been saved. After this I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. Now, I've left out quite a bit, a chunk here about the angels praising God and so on, because I want to press on with this bit. These are they which come out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore are they before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he that sitteth on the throne shall dwell among them. They shall hunger no more, nor shall they thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb, which is in the midst of the throne, shall feed them, and shall lead them unto living fountains of water, and God shall wipe away all their tears. And that's in Revelation 7:9-17. Not all of it, as I said, I left out a bit. Thus, the end, that should be the sixth seal, with thus ends the sixth seal with an upbeat prophecy that the souls who came down from the sky, the 144,000, in order to help the world, will return, but also be joined by a myriad of souls from planet Earth. These sons and daughters of Horus, as the Egyptians would have called them, will go to heaven, to a place where the sun doesn't shine, and they're always in the company of God. This is a very optimistic interlude before the tougher parts of the revelation begin, with the opening of the seventh seal in the next chapter. So, my friends, I hope you enjoyed that. There's hope for all of us. We don't have to be of the 144,000. It's not a competition. There's myriads of others who are the true believers, who've washed themselves in the blood of Jesus Christ, and who are going to be resurrected and go up to a higher level at the end of days, at the end of this time, after the tribulations of the Revelation. So it's a very optimistic note, and I thank you very much Again, if you haven't already subscribed, please do. And if you enjoyed what I've told you here in this lecture, please give it a like. You'll be helping everything. Thank you very much.